His death is a loss to his children.
Do you remember her imploring you to put on a good act?
I do.
His parents, sister.
Do you know why your mom would Google how to teach an actress emotion?
I don't know.
Did she ever share with you or forward you any tips on how to bring emotion or fake emotion?
Not that I remember of any kind.
All of us and his family, his friends. Can I have a tissue, please?
The intention of justice is to see that the guilty people are proven guilty and that the innocent are freed. Only we have a problem here.
Welcome. This is the I Don't Belong Here show, and I am your host, Samantha Benigno. I am a behavioral scientist, a career psychotherapist, a 6th-year PhD candidate in clinical psychology, a master's level psychologist and counselor. And today we are breaking down the scene at the Adelson sentencing hearing. And what a scene it was. So we got a rare treat here, which should have been just a routine sentencing hearing turned into a complete fiasco.
By silence, by denial, and perhaps even active exploitation, and used for activities she had no part of. So I believe she's innocent on all 3 counts, even though she was found guilty on all 3 counts.
This is on behalf of myself and my wife, Susan Brotman, an attorney at law. We have known Donna Adelson for over 35 years. She's been a dear friend and travel companion, and we are still in shock of her current circumstances. We know her to be a loving parent, wife, and grandparent. We stand behind her claim of innocence. We feel the trial was held in a county where there's been a lot of bad and inaccurate negative publicity.
Turn that phone off or step out.
First letter that was submitted to the court was by Annie Cunningham and Ronald Gutterson, who testified at trial. They say, "We are writing this letter to restate our knowledge and feelings regarding Donna Adelson. She was always concerned with the welfare of others. She is not the monster portrayed by the media. I still use what I've learned from her and apply it while I'm at work every day. My name is Gary Cohen. The Donna I know is the last person I would ever think of when it comes to what has been this utterly horrible crime."
Thank you, Judge, and respected officers of the court for allowing me to speak. I have been Donna Adelson's husband for over 50 years. My wife sacrificed everything so that she could pour her heart and soul into our children, our grandchildren, and our marriage.
Well, I'm a domestic coordinator.
A domestic coordinator?
Yes. I'm responsible for the activities, classes, and lessons of my son Robert, who is 16, Charlie, who is 12, Wendi, who is 10, my husband Harvey, who's in the audience, and my dog Sam.
She has done nothing wrong, and yet is being punished for a crime that she did not commit. I thought we lived in a different kind of world, but I guess I was wrong. I didn't know that you could lie in a courtroom, but apparently you can. Danny's parents contend that they have never seen their grandchild. But for years they say they've never seen her. But Wendi has shared with me pictures and videos. A biased judge and jury were influenced by years of one-sided news pieces and social media.
Doctor, Ms. Fulford, this has nothing to do with the character of the defendant or relates to the sentencing.
May I just one moment, please?
Go ahead.
So this hearing was quite the fiasco. And today we're going to focus specifically on Donna Adelson's statement to the court during the sentencing, before the sentencing was imposed. This was essentially her pleading with the judge that she was an innocent woman. Now, before we go through this statement, there are two things that I want you to keep in your mind about what Donna Adelson is holding in her mind as she reads this. The first is, we know that she is running with the idea that this was an extortion and not we hired these hitmen and we paid them after. And in part, she has to run with that because during Charlie's trial, once that came out, the day after, I believe it was, or maybe even the same day that Charlie testifies to this extortion plot, she's texting everybody she knows, emailing them, saying, see, now the truth is out there. We're all so relieved. So she has already took a stance there and told everybody that they know and love that is what happened, that they were extorted, that Catherine McBanois saw an opportunity to extort Charlie Adelson because she knew he had stacks of cash in a safe. And instead of just stealing the money, of course, they went and killed an innocent man for Charlie, but not at Charlie's request, right? So that's what Donna is kind of running with, okay? So that's the first thing. The other thing is you must keep in mind that Donna Adelson doesn't think it was a bad thing that Dan Markel was killed, right? They did this because they hated him. We already know through the grandma motion.
Do you recall a motion being filed by Dan Markel that we've referred to as the grandma motion?
No.
Did Dan Markel in March 26th of 2014 file a motion seeking to preclude your mother from having unsupervised contact with your kids?
I don't remember him filing that motion, but it sounds like if it's a motion you have a name for, then it exists.
And in that motion, do you recall, or does it refresh your memory, that he was saying, Grandma, the boys were telling him, Grandma says you're stupid, Grandma says she hates you, and as a result, he was concerned about your mom alienating the kids or turning the kids against him?
I remember hearing about this motion.
Okay.
The motion that Dan Markel had filed to keep Donna Adelson away from the children, because on two occasions the kids had gone back to Dan and said, Grandma says that you're trying to take away her sunshines. We also know, and this has come out more even recently, thanks to the lawyer that Markel had hired after the divorce, that they were just about to file, in fact, even on the day that he is murdered, a motion accusing Wendi Adelson of stealing money.
And he convinced me that he was on the right side of history and that he was going to be able to establish that Wendi had indeed concealed assets and committed fraud. And then for me, what moved me was his main concern was what he believed was the alienation of his children. And when I heard that, and I knew it wasn't about money, that was a big game changer for me too, because going in there just to fight for money with children in the mix and all that, it's just kind of just unpalatable to me. But if you're fighting because you feel like people on the other side are hurting your children or trying to estrange you from your children, which is what Danny was fighting for. He was fighting for children, not money. And Wendi was the exact opposite. They wanted money, period. I said, you know what? This is a fight I can get behind. And so I decided I was going to work with him. He had absolute dead bang proof that she had committed fraud in her financial disclosures. And I was like, look, we're going to give her a chance to either come clean. Well, I'm going to ask her to admit that you committed fraud. And if she denies it, she'll just be guilty of committing a second act of fraud. And that was kind of my strategy with him. But I told him, I said, look, man, if I file this, even if she zigs or zags, it doesn't really matter at that point, because one way or the other, she's going to be on the hook for fraud. And it could have real dire consequences on her ability to practice law and to work and on your children. And if we have to do it, we have to do it. But I really feel like I owe it to your children to at least go try to talk to her lawyer. See if we can't figure out some way to resolve this short of full on, conflagration. And met with her lawyer. And he's a very, very, very reputable lawyer here in town. Been around a long, long time, tried a bunch of cases. And I'd worked with him on some white collar stuff in the past, so I knew him. And he kind of poo-pooed what I was saying. That's the only time in my career as a lawyer that I've ever gone to another lawyer's office and tried to broker a deal. For me, it could be perceived as a sign of weakness, and so it's not something I would normally ever entertain. But I felt so strongly about the fact that if this went forward with this litigation, that it was going to be so damaging to Wendi, that I just had no choice but to take the risk of looking weak. And so I turned around and was walking out of his office, and I'd reached out and grabbed his doorknob, and I could still see it in my mind's eye. And he said, "Stephen, I know what you're trying to do." And it was like, for the first time, he wasn't all shucks at me. He said, "Stephen, I know what you're trying to do, and I appreciate it." And I turned around, looked back at him, and I said, "Well, Jimmy, if I feel like I owe it to your client to at least give her this chance to see if we can't find common ground." I said, "But if I haven't heard from her or you on July 18th, I'm going to file something. And when I file it, I feel like there's going to be no going back." And he said, "I understand." And I never heard back from them.
All right. So let's go ahead and go through Donna's statement. It's not terribly long. And the way I think about it is there are really two parts. Okay. The first part is all about what a terrible tragedy it is that Dan Markel is murdered. And the purpose of this, I think from Donna's perspective, and remember, Donna's pretty sheltered, right? I mean, she's been in jail, now prison, but before the sentencing, she was in jail, right? Awaiting the sentencing, and now I'm sure will be moved to prison. But so she's like in jail for a long time. Before that, she's in her own little orbit where they're pretty insulated from the outside world, right? They know that we're all there, but they're not really paying attention to it. They're, communicating with each other sort of, like when people do that, when we stay in our small little bubble, we're recycling the same information over and over again amongst each other. There's no new or outside information infiltrating, right? I'm sure her lawyers are, on board with this whole extortion plot. So they're kind of buying it and feeding into it even further. And so by the time that we get to the sentencing, think about how long ago Dan Markel was actually murdered, right? I mean, she's had plenty of time to adopt the extortion plot as her truth, right? So it appears to all of us like she's just totally tone deaf. Like, how could you possibly get up there and talk about how wonderful Dan Markel is, right? Like, from all of our perspective, it's like, how could you do that? Like, what is wrong with you? But from her perspective, she's trying to sell herself and everybody else that she didn't do this, right? That she would have stopped it if she could. So from her vantage point, she's trying to convince us all that Dan Markel was someone she cared about and would never actually have tried to kill. And so from her perspective, the only way to do that is to talk, I guess, what she thinks is kindly about Dan and to seem like she's remorseful for the loss of his life. So rather than be remorseful or show the judge that she's remorseful for having committed the crime, she's trying to evidence remorse for the loss of Dan Markel. And this is how, like in her mind, that's remorse, right? So when her lawyers said, okay, this is an allocution hearing, and the point of this is to evidence remorse, that's the reason why she starts out with this statement about Dan Markel. But you'll note that even when she's trying to sound remorseful for the loss of Dan Markel, she still comes up short. And I'll point that out as we go through. So that's the first part. The second part is really what she wants to say, and you can see it. I'll point it out when we get there, but her tone completely changes, and it's what she really wants to say, which is, the court is wrong, and how could they convict her? She's innocent, all of that, okay? So let's jump right in, and let's do an analysis of the statement of Donna Adelson at her sentencing hearing. Okay. And before we get started, I just want to thank the Trial Channel for their amazing offering of the footage. In this case, it's funny, you would think that there's all of these different ways to watch the trial or to go back and watch, the real time recording of the sentencing hearing, but nobody does the cutting out of the, minutia and the inserting of the timestamps or the important timestamps the way the Trial Channel does. So if you are interested in trial footage, definitely you need to know about the Trial Channel. Okay. So let's jump right in.
Okay. Is this loud enough, Judge?
I can hear you.
Thank you for letting me speak. My son-in-law, Dan Markell, was a fine and decent man. He was well educated and passionate about his career. He was a good son-in-law.
So she starts out, my son-in-law, Dan Markell, was a fine and decent man. So I ask you, okay, if you are trying to exhibit remorse for the loss of somebody and make it seem genuine, is this the way you would start that statement? Even though it's completely tone deaf, all of that aside, all right? She's obviously made the determination that this is something she has to do, that they did this all through her defense as well, which I thought was egregious, right? Just the worst possible choice to try to make it seem like she loved Danny. That was almost worse than just admitting that I hate him. I did not like him. I couldn't stand him. I wanted no part of him, but I didn't kill him, right? I feel like that would have been a better play at this point because of all of the media, because of all of the negative attention. But instead, they tried to do it this other way by saying oh, I'm so sorry, he's gone. But again, the first thing she says is he's a fine and decent man. As opposed to, my son-in-law, Dan Markell, was someone that I loved, that I valued, and that I was so grateful for. Like, none of that, right? It's just, he was a fine and decent man. So it's like, even when she's trying to say something nice or to be remorseful or to sound remorseful about his loss, about the loss of Dan Markell, it's not coming across that way. It's coming across as almost someone like she doesn't really know. It's cold and distant. He was well educated and passionate about his career. Okay. So he was a fine and decent man. He was well educated and passionate about his career. These are things that I could have said about Dan Markell, just based on the very limited information I have about him. This is how a complete stranger could have spoken about him, based on what we've all seen, right? He seemed like a fine and decent man. He clearly was well educated, went to Harvard, and he was clearly passionate, spoke passionately about the law.
So the paper is about the tissue connecting democratic citizenship with retributive justice. And the argument is that contrary to some of the leading criminal law theorists like Michael Moore.
But this is somebody that knew him intimately. This is his mother-in-law, right? And here she is trying to sound remorseful for his passing. And it's just not working, right? It's just not working. All right, we'll keep going.
Dan Markell was a fine and decent man. He was well educated and passionate about his career. He was a good son-in-law, but more importantly, he was a caring and loving father.
he was a good son-in-law. I wonder what that meant, right? Like, what does that mean? What is a good son-in-law? It kind of has, it's very kind of placating. Like, he was a good little boy, that kind of thing. So that was interesting. She's thought this through, right? I mean, she's had how many weeks now to sit in her cell and carefully think about what she wants to say during the statement. And this is the best she could do. I mean, it's just striking, right? Now, there is one more thing I want you to notice here. Watch how she is playing to the judge. I'm going to rewind this. Just watch how she's playing to the judge.
Dan Morkill was a fine and decent man. He was well educated and passionate about his career. He was a good son-in-law, but more importantly, he was a caring and loving father.
We also, by the way, all know that he was a caring and loving father. Okay. Again, nothing that the average stranger off the street that never knew Dan Markel and only even loosely followed this case could tell you just from a couple of news articles.
On July 18th, 2014, his car was followed, leaving his home. It should have been just like any other day, an ordinary day in the life of Ben and Lincoln's father.
All right, so this is also just really bizarre. It's like you couldn't just leave it at the first part. Dan was a good guy. Now we have to get into the details of how he was murdered. But she's doing that on purpose because she's trying to say, look, we know who murdered him and it wasn't me. We know who it was. They've been in jail for a long time now, right? So that's the reason why she's pointing out who the real killers were, okay? And you'll also note it should have been just like any other day, an ordinary day in the life of Ben and Lincoln's father. So I think what she's trying to do is make it sound like this is why I care about him, because I care about my grandkids. And this was their father. So she's trying to point out how she was related to him. But what it's actually doing is coming off like distance. It wasn't really about me and how I felt about Dan. It was about his boys. However, in this context, it doesn't work, right? Because it just makes it seem like she's trying to get farther away from him. And she's not saying it should have been just like any other day, an ordinary day in Dan Markel's life. Right? So now we're talking about the murder itself, and she's not able to use his name. Instead, she's putting this distance between her and him, both not using his name, and she's taken herself and her relationship with him out of the equation by making Dan Ben and Lincoln's father.
But it wasn't. He didn't know when he left his boys off at daycare that would be the last time he would see them and the last time they would see him.
And now, I know this has been pointed out quite a bit, that there's all these moments where she appears like she's trying to put forth like she's crying, but there are no tears. And consider that also. I think it is important to point out she's trying to make it seem like she's sad and so devastated by this loss. And she sort of emphasizes it whenever she's talking about her grandkids, because she's trying to say, see how much I care, because I never would have taken away these grandkids who I love. I never would have taken their father away, which of course all of us know is absurd, right? She hated him.
He didn't know when he went to the gym afterwards that would be the last time he would exercise. And he didn't know when he drove home that his life would end within minutes. Danny wasn't just being followed, he was being hunted. He was brutally murdered in broad daylight, sitting in his car, in his garage, by vicious killers.
Right. So again, she's running with the extortion story. He was hunted by vicious killers, not me. I'm just Ben and Lincoln's grandmother.
I cannot imagine the terror he felt when he saw a gun.
It's interesting, just noteworthy here. She uncontracts this statement, right? I cannot imagine the terror that he felt when he saw a gun.
Pointed at him through the window of his car. I cannot conceive of his heroic efforts to stay alive during the hours after the attack.
Again, she keeps looking up at the judge almost to see how he's responding or to try to gauge what his reaction is. It's like, Donna, after all of this, you've had an entire trial. Give it up. Enough. But it just shows you how invested they are in this narrative. I am innocent. We are innocent.
Danny died in the early morning hours of July 19th. His death is a loss to his children, his parents, his sister, all of us in his family, his friends, his colleagues in the legal community, and to his students at FSU Law School.
And just the balls on this lady, right? It's like, how dare you? Imagine being Dan Markel's parents after everything that went on through the divorce, after all those emails that we saw from Donna about parading the kids around in Nazi uniforms and, how they were celebrating when Wendi actually told him about the divorce as he was about to go on the stage to give some speech at a conference. I mean, there was such an evil undertone to everything that these people did to try to get this relocation motion passed. It's just so insincere. But here she is talking about Danny. I mean, it almost makes you sick. And that's how tone deaf they are. And this is interesting because, again, she's trying to act like she's among those that have been negatively impacted by his loss. Then all of us in his family, when she includes, I suppose that's supposed to be like her little clan, right? All of us in his family, his friends, his colleagues in the legal community, and then finally the students. So it's interesting that she puts herself right in the middle of this group. And that also gives you some sense of, right, how she sees the way she's supposed to see this. So it also tells you that Donna is very aware of the aesthetics. Like she's aware of what it should look like from the outside, right? The kids should be the ones that are the most affected, followed by his parents, followed by the extended family, followed by friends, followed by colleagues, right? So she's going through this from an intellectual perspective, as though it's an intellectual exercise. And she's no dummy, right? But note that there's no emotional connection here. This is purely an intellectual exercise where she's trying to say all the right things.
Danny's boys each have a photo of themselves with their Abba, their dad, beside their beds. They grew up kissing the framed photo and saying, "Good night, Abba, I love you."
All right, so let's take a look at that. My guess is this is true. And it's funny, right? Danny's boys each have a photo of themselves with their Abba, their dad. Oh, let's see. beside their beds. They grew up kissing the framed photo and saying, "Good night, Abba, I love you." My guess is that's true. Now, why would that be true? Because they, of course, do not want these two boys to think ever that they are the ones that are responsible for their father's murder. Wendi doesn't want her sons knowing, especially as they get older now, they're teenagers, right? Like 15 and 16, something around there. She does not want them seeing all of this negative publicity and starting to go down the rabbit hole. Maybe my mom and grandma did do this. So as the negative publicity continued, my guess is they would have at least make it look like they cared about the fact that he was gone.
The pictures and memories are all they have because cruel, cold-hearted people took him from all of us who loved him. My heart was broken when Danny died. My grandsons were going to grow up without the father who loved them. I wondered, how could we help these boys through this trauma?
But pictures and memories are all they have because cruel, cold-hearted people took him from all of us who loved him. I always say, right? People are complicated. You can have two things be true at the same time. You can be responsible for somebody's death and still be like heartbroken because it's a horrible thing that you felt compelled to do. But I think, and this is something that's so important to always keep in mind, they think that they did a good thing that they had to do because of Dan Markel's behavior, right? So from their perspective, it's Danny's fault that he's not here. If Dan just had let the litigation stuff go, if he had let Wendi and the kids relocate, right? If he hadn't been so difficult asking about Skyping and right of first refusal and pushing the $400,000 that Wendi stole, if he hadn't done those things, then we wouldn't have had to kill him. So I think from their perspective, that's the reason why they don't feel guilty about his death. Because they feel like it was his fault that they had to kill him. So it could be true that my heart was broken, at least in her mind, right? Like my heart was broken that he made us do this to him. That's what I gleaned from Harvey's statement, which was very, very short. But that's really, again, what I think enables them to kind of continue to put forth this "we're innocent, see, we cared so much about Danny." I think that's what allows for it.
It was then that my husband and I knew that the best way to honor Danny's memory would be to share with these children an abundance of love, the love that Danny would have given them if he were alive. It is interesting how the state...
All right, so, and I just want you to take 1 second. I'm just going to read this, and I'm going to try to do what Donna's doing here, okay? So I'm just going to take a moment. Danny died in the early morning hours of July 19th. His death is a loss to his children, his parents, sister, all of us, and his family, his friends. Can I have a tissue, please?
Now, do you have any acting training?
No.
Do you know why your mom would Google how to teach an actress emotion?
I don't know.
Did she ever share with you or forward you any tips on how to bring emotion or fake emotion?
Not that I remember of any kind.
I mean, particularly if all you've had is time to write this, think about what you want to say at sentencing and practice how you're going to present it. I mean, this isn't even quality acting. It's just wouldn't be that difficult is my feeling. All right, but now we're going to get into the real stuff, and you're going to start to see that everything about her voice, her tone, the look on her face, everything changes now. So let's start with the second half of the statement.
If he were alive. It is interesting how the state can't make up its mind about who is what they call the, quote, mastermind behind this murder. In both of Catherine Magbanaway's trials, the state claimed she was the mastermind behind Danny's murder. In my son Charlie Adelson's trial, they claimed he was the mastermind. And now in my trial, they claimed that I, this grandma, was the mastermind behind the murder.
Right, so I'm just this poor little old grandma who was so devastated by Danny's death. And one of the reasons why she's emboldened to make these statements, and Harvey too, is because what she's saying isn't false. I mean, it's true, right? In other words, the state didn't prove that anything that they hired hitmen before the crime. That was the only reason when I first started investigating this case, really deeply, that I had some reservation about how the state was able to bring all these charges, because there was no evidence of any money exchanging hands until after Dan is already killed, right? But that's exactly what Donna Adelson is hanging her hat on here in this statement. This is me interrupting your programming to remind you to like this video right now. And don't forget to subscribe. Like this video.
I had no idea that other people planned to cut Danny's life short.
Now, this one is really interesting. This one I had to sit with for a minute. I had no idea that other people planned to cut Danny's life short. So this to me feels like a slip up. And this is kind of what we talk about all the time when we talk about what the differences are between how innocent people speak and how guilty people speak, right? Innocent people don't use words like other people, right? Or just, because there's no need to, right? In other words, an innocent person here simply says, I didn't know about a plot to kill Danny. I didn't know about a plot to cut his life short. But Donna has to try to separate herself from the other people in her mind. And in doing that, she both indicts that she had been thinking about cutting his life short and insinuates that the other people, and to me, it sounds like she's insinuating other people in the family, perhaps Wendi even? I mean, this reads like an admission to me. So let me read this again. I had no idea that other people planned to cut Danny's life short. And it wouldn't surprise me if she can say that in a way because she didn't know who the hitmen were. And to be completely clear, remember, we're talking about the subconscious and then the conscious mind. So the subconscious mind just admitted that she had information in addition to other people. Like, I didn't know they also were going to, have a plan to kill Dan. Or I didn't know they were also involved in the plan to kill Dan. Then there's the conscious level, which is why in her mind she could rationalize making a statement like that, which would have been because she's trying to separate herself from the hitmen. Right? She wasn't the one who actually, hired the people who were going to do this. So that's one of those statements that, without even realizing it, you're kind of indicting yourself. Okay, so then she goes on to say,
people who did this are exactly where they deserve to be. But I had no knowledge that this horrible, evil act was going to take place. If I had become aware of this plan before Danny was murdered, I would have stopped it.
And the people who did this are exactly where they deserve to be. Okay. But I had no knowledge that this horrible, evil act was going to take place. If I had become aware of this plan before Danny was murdered, I would have stopped it. What she's saying here is, I did have intimate knowledge about this plan, but only after Danny was already murdered. So this, to me, in her mind, as she's writing this, we know that she's still running with the extortion story. And I've said it before, she's gotten as close to convincing herself that it's true as you could get without believing it's true, because she knows what really happened. But she has been running with that for so long that now, when she sat down to write this statement, that's what she was holding in her mind. But I had no knowledge that this horrible, evil act. So that's interesting. So, but I had no knowledge that this horrible, evil act. So the this in this statement pulls the horrible, evil act closer to her. If I had become aware of this plan, again, this plan, there it is again. If I had become aware of this plan, wow, before Danny was murdered, I would have stopped it. It's very interesting because, again, we have this plan, which means that, again, the plan itself feels close to her. Okay.
With not one iota of actual evidence.
In a way, this is kind of like a play on words for her psychologically. Note the stress on actual evidence, because they do have evidence. They absolutely have evidence. But she's focusing on a very specific type of evidence. My DNA was not at the scene.
The state convinced a Tallahassee jury.
Okay, so note the anger and, of course, the stress on the Tallahassee jury, because they're the problem.
That I solicited and conspired with other people to have Danny killed. Where is the evidence prior to the murder? The evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the state needed to prove their case.
So again, you'll note, just generally speaking, she's going back to the extortion, reference, right? Where is the evidence before the murder? And this is something that guilty people do. They over-focus on some very specific or obtuse aspect of the evidence and try to say, see, look, the state didn't do this very specific thing, or they only had evidence of this other thing, and they get into the minutia, as though no evidence equals no crime. And again, something is so off about this statement. No matter who you are, you can tell that it's off, but you're not sure why, right? Like, it just seems so wrong. First, that Donna Adelson, of all people, is going to spend whatever time she has in front of the judge first talking about how remorseful she is about Dan's death. I mean, it's just, again, so it lacks taste inherently. And then goes back to relitigate the minutia of her case. There's no evidence that ties me to the murder until after the murder, right? And to her, that's the whole extortion thing. Just a couple other things. When statements are made in the negative, that's always something to note, right? But I had no knowledge that this horrible, evil act, which she feels close to, this horrible, evil act, which is also an indirect reference. So she's calling the murder an evil act, but she's not speaking about what that evil act was, right? It's a horrible, evil act, and I am just a poor little grandma, right? That kind of thing. So then she says, if I had become aware of this plan before Danny was murdered, I would have stopped it. And then again, we're back in the negative with not one iota of actual evidence. Now, of course, this is absolutely speculative, but with not one iota of actual evidence, the state convinced a Tallahassee, she stresses Tallahassee jury, that I solicited and conspired with other people. Second time she references other people to have Danny killed. I think that when she's saying it here with the other people, that she's kind of trying to reference those who were already convicted. But the only problem is, in actuality, she did conspire with other people to have Danny killed. So it's very possible that this is like a form of leakage. And if you go back to the time that she uses, I had no idea that other people planned to cut Danny's life short. That's another use there, reference to other people, like almost other people, wink, wink, not naming who the other people were. I don't think that Donna Adelson blames Wendi for this, based on the fact that she absolutely loves Wendi. Like, that is her prized possession from Donna's view. So I think as long as Wendi still is in charge of the kids, then she can kind of put her head on the pillow at night. And so I don't think there's any way that Donna would indict Wendi intentionally.
Where is the evidence before July 18th, 2014 at 10:50 in the morning?
Before you continue, Mrs. Adelson, as it relates to this statement, is the defense trying to re-argue the trial?
No, Judge, just giving Adelson an opportunity to be heard.
Right? No, I'm just pleading my case because I'm hoping that you'll go light on my sentencing because you'll see that I'm innocent. Well, if you're going to do that, by the way, do you think that the smart play is to have your husband stand up and call the judge biased and then throw Tallahassee under the bus? Like, do you really think this is going to help you? Like, who is this statement for? Because it's not for the judge. Obviously, her husband just stood up and threw the judge under the bus. And here, she's about to do the same thing. So who is she actually making this statement for? So is it for all of us? I mean, if you consider what we know about the Adelsons, it's quite possible that this statement is to try to sway public opinion more than anything else.
Mrs. Adelson, you certainly can continue. However, the court can take into consideration the utter lack of remorse that you are displaying. Please proceed if you desire to do so.
Where is the evidence before July 18th?
So I don't know if you saw that. Let's take a look at that again. So the judge says, you know, basically gives her a warning. Like, you do realize that I could use your total lack of remorse against you in the sentencing hearing. So she kind of looks at him and then she realizes what he says. And she kind of, gives this snarky look and then goes back to reading. See if you can see it here. There it is.
Where is the evidence before July 18th, 2014 at 10:50 a.m. that revealed that I had any involvement in this vile and horrific act?
Okay. Where is the evidence before July 18th, 2014 at 10:50 in the morning? Very interesting and very specific statement there. Where is the evidence before July 18th at 10:50 in the morning?
Where is the solicitation and conspiracy evidence? The state needed to show that there was evidence before the murder to convict me. The state couldn't show that because there wasn't any evidence.
Now it seems like she's almost afraid to get yelled at by the judge. Like she's looking up to see if he's going to scold her. So again, we have this statement. These statements are, again, spoken in the negative, which is just so interesting. She keeps doing that, right? In other words, as opposed to saying, I am innocent, what she's saying is, I'm not guilty. Right? And although it doesn't seem like it should make a difference, it definitely does. Because this is something guilty people do.
The state needed to show that there was evidence before the murder to convict me. The state couldn't show that because there wasn't any evidence. They were trying an innocent person.
Notice that this is spoken in the third person. This is not her saying she is innocent.
It makes you wonder if the jurors were sleeping when the state had Sergeant Corbett on the stand for hours.
So where is the solicitation and conspiracy evidence? The state needed to show that there was evidence before the murder to convict me. The state couldn't show that because there wasn't any evidence. So that's another example. The state couldn't because there wasn't any evidence. They were trying an innocent person. It makes you wonder if the jurors were sleeping when the state had Sergeant Corbett on the stand for hours. Okay, we'll keep going.
Their own star witness testified that my phone was never, I repeat, never at my son's house on the night of the murder.
Are you familiar with Catherine McDaniel's statement that Charlie Adelson told her that his parents had just been at her home the night of Dan Markel's murder before she arrived at the home?
Her home or his home?
I'm sorry, his home, Charlie Adelson's home.
Yes.
The state's theory that my husband and I dropped off money to my son was blown out of the water by their own witness.
Is there evidence in the phone records that Donna Adelson went to Charlie Adelson's home on the night of Dan Markel's murder?
So there is another communication from Miss Donna Adelson at 8:59 p.m. stating outside your house.
Outside your house, and she's sending that message to Charlie Adelson, is that right?
Correct.
What can you tell us about her locations that night and how long she could have spent at Charlie's residence after sending this message?
So to do this analysis, I looked at the events that we had with usable locations, and we see that there is this 6-minute phone call, and this is the 8:35 location we saw in the previous slide. But we see this phone call actually begins on the cell site in the bottom of this slide, which should be 263, and it ends on the cell site at the top. So to conduct an analysis of potential time between points, we need to establish a point to start measuring from. So my estimation of the approximate handset's location between these two cell sites for this phone call is approximately the area of that 832 little call out here in the middle. So that is the point that I started, again, with based on these two phone calls, or the beginning and ending cell sites, estimated that the handset was approximately in the area of that marker at 832. Same thing for the ending phone call, or the next phone call that we had at 10:53. We see the cell site that it begins on and the cell site that it ends on a little further north. And so that will be consistent again with the handset continuing to travel along the area of the turnpike. And for our ending time here, I again estimated the location of the handset to be where that white call out box is at approximately 10:53 p.m. So with those 2 points and using the Esri route planning tool, Esri is the mapping software that we use, it tells us that that travel should have taken approximately about an hour and 4 minutes. And what we see is between 8:32 and 10:53 is actually 2 hours and 21 minutes. So the distance traveled is not consistent with the time consumed.
You spoke about Esri. Is that also how Department of Transportation estimates mileage as well?
Yes, if you go to the official Department of Transportation site to get mileage for business travel, they use the same software.
What can you determine about when Donna Adelson would have reached Charlie Adelson's residence according to this estimated travel time?
So if we look at this, and again, we see the area of Charlie Adelson's residence, we have the message at 8:59 that says outside your house. Charlie responds to that about 20 minutes later with 10 men, 10 minutes. So again, using the same route planning, we see that that should have taken approximately 25 minutes to travel from our 8:32 starting point to Charlie Adelson's residence. And so that would have put the estimated time of arrival at his residence 8:57, and the text message is sent at 8:59. So that would be pretty consistent.
Their own star witness testified that my phone was never, and I repeat, never, at my son's house on the night of the murder. So we have two nevers, repeating nevers. And then she says the state's theory that my husband and I dropped off money to my son was blown out of the water by their own witness. And yet the state continued to push that story, that lie of the so-called money drop to the jury. So she's really trying to put distance between herself and the money drop through the remainder of the trial. If anything, I think we just saw it. Sergeant Corbett did a hell of a job of proving that it was very possible that Donna and Harvey were at Charlie's house to drop the money off. I mean, it's, in a way, it's a no-brainer, right? It's the one piece of evidence to me that definitively connects her to the crime. Without this very specific evidence, I'm not sure there is any evidence that directly connects her, except for incriminating after-the-fact conversations, cryptic discussions with Charlie through the jailhouse calls, and then the fact that she was trying to go to a country without an extradition treaty. But that by itself doesn't necessarily mean that she did anything. It could just be that she didn't want to get arrested, knowing that they were going to try to say that she did something, right? So that's not by itself incriminating. Not enough, to meet the bar of beyond reasonable doubt. Okay.
And yet, the state continued to push that story, that lie of the so-called money drop to the jury through the remainder of the trial. And the jury bought into it, hook, line, and sinker. Reasonable doubt. Many months ago, my attorneys filed a motion for a change of venue. An expert witness testified that Tallahassee had been barraged with over 9 years of negative social media printed news, television news, and podcast publicity about my family.
Now, we have been hearing Charlie, right, talking about this as far back as during his trial and then after he was convicted. This was his big complaint. Oh, everybody's biased because it's Tallahassee. This is a small town community. Nothing exciting ever happens here. Of course, everybody already thinks that we were guilty. They're looking for retribution. So this whole narrative has been, as I was saying earlier, tossed back and forth amongst these people for years now, right? Because Charlie's trial was back in 2022. This has been going on for a long time, or 2023. Sorry, 2023. So this has been going on for a while now, right? For years, I would say probably in almost every discussion they have, part of the discussion is how some big injustice is being waged on them because, because they know that there is no evidence other than the word of mouth of Catherine McBanoa and her, merry bandits, of a crime having been committed, right? Aside from their testimony, they don't have evidence of them actually giving money to anyone before Dan is murdered. And they know it.
He explained to the court, both with evidence and demonstratives, that for me to receive a fair trial, it needed to be held in any of the researched and designated areas in the state of Florida other than Tallahassee. All I wanted was a level playing field, but the court wanted the trial here in the hotbed of Tallahassee. I sat through 3 days of jury selection.
And you'll note that this is just, why Donna is a victim, this whole thing. And that's not surprising. In fact, if you had asked me before she gave the statement, if Donna was to give a statement at sentencing, what would it look like? This is what I would have told you it was going to look like. Her, blaming everybody else for why she's now the victim.
180 potential jurors were asked if they had developed an opinion in my case. Those that answered yes also added, I believe she is guilty. Not one person, not one, said, I think she may be innocent. That should have been a clue to the court to grant our motion for a change of venue, but the court denied the motion. One of my jurors admitted during jury selection that she had background information concerning what one of the state's witnesses would be testifying about. Why was she allowed to be on my jury?
What moment?
Another juror.
Mrs. Fulford.
Oh, I didn't hear you.
Mr. Zellman.
She's, thinks he's about to yell at her, which is kind of funny there. Oh, I didn't hear you.
What moment?
Another juror.
Mrs. Fulford.
Oh, I didn't hear you.
Mr. Zellman. Again, this has nothing to do with elocution of any sort. This is a raising of grievances, which are properly given to the appellate court. What does any of this have to do with sentencing?
Just one moment, please.
Mm-hmm. Look at the judge's face. Like, what is this?
Please.
What happened to Danny is unforgivable. But I am an innocent woman convicted of this terrible crime without evidence. Danny was a brilliant legal scholar. He would have been appalled at the total lack of justice that went on during my trial. He would have been embarrassed to have his name associated with any of it.
And again, note, this is an intellectual argument. This is what this entire statement has been. This is an intellectual exercise for Donna. Based on the quote evidence, how can I convince everybody that I was railroaded, that I was railroaded by a biased judge and a biased jury in this small town of Tallahassee because there's been all this negative press about me. And so see, objectively, I shouldn't have been found guilty. Even Dan Markel would think that.
There are two crimes here. The first was Danny being viciously murdered. The second one is taking my life, the life of an innocent woman. Convicting me should not be retribution for Danny's death.
And this is interesting, right? Convicting me should not be retribution for Danny's death. But it can only be retribution for Danny's death if she's guilty, right? It's the only way that this is retribution for Danny is if Donna is guilty. Convicting me should not be, and by the way, this is an uncontracted, should not be retribution for Danny's death. So this statement right here is very suspect to me.
I do intend to file an appeal so that hopefully I have the opportunity to be given a fair trial outside of Tallahassee. 11 years ago, Danny was murdered and taken from all of us who loved him. For the past 9.5 years, the state has broadcast to the world, including Danny's parents and sister, that I hired hitmen to kill him. Never in a million years would I have wanted Danny to be harmed or killed.
Right. So this never, you guys already know it, right? This is, you can see right here, never in a million years. That's super problematic. Would I have wanted Danny to be harmed or killed? For the past, so 11 years ago, Danny was murdered and taken from all of us who loved him. So she's speaking generally there, not taken from me, but she's saying taken from all of us who loved him. For the past 11.5 years, the state has broadcast to the world, including Danny's parents and sister, that I hired hitmen to kill him. And then never in a million years would I have wanted Danny to be harmed or killed. Okay? So we already know that's a problem. And then she says, nor could I ever do something that would leave these two small boys to grow up without him. Nor could I ever do something. So this is just more of the same, right? It's never, ever. These are both problematic. So I love these boys more than life itself. That I think is true. This is a lifetime of loss for those children. That I believe she thinks is true. They didn't deserve this. Also true. His family didn't deserve this. Also true. Danny didn't deserve this. So that is interesting that she's got that here. They didn't deserve this. His family didn't deserve this. Danny didn't deserve this. And so, as I appear before you today, Your Honor, I promise you with my whole heart, I swear to you on my life, oh, listen to this, I was not involved in any way with Danny's murder. So that's uncontracted. I was not uncontracted. Right? A lot of these, like, absolutely I didn't, which, are usually very problematic. And then we have her speaking in a very obtuse, nuanced way about the nitty-gritty evidence that specifically there isn't any actual evidence of her, being directly tied to the murder of Dan Markel until after the murder is already done. And that's the thing that she just keeps going back to. And because that's true factually, she can keep going back to it. But again, this is the kind of thing that guilty people do. They look for like the factually true thing that they can kind of hold onto or like hang their hat on, and then they beat that over the head, right? They beat that over your head. So, and then she's of course playing the victim, which is very predictable for what we know about Donna Adelson, and very predictable of how narcissists behave. She tries to play the like, I'm just the lowly little grandma role. And I think a lot of what probably does make this charged for Donna is the idea that she's not going to be a part of the boys' lives, because that is the thing that she does care about the most, right? Is manipulating her grandchildren, because she does see them as an extension of her. So that's the big loss, I think, for Donna, is in addition to just not having the obvious comforts of her former life, but not being able to mold and shape continually her grandsons, which, you know, were the whole point, the whole reason to get rid of Dan Markel to begin with.
On count one of the indictment for first-degree murder, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole or release, pursuant to sections 782.04 and 775.082 sub 1 sub a Florida statutes. On count two of the indictment, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, you are hereby sentenced to 30 years in the Department of Corrections that will run consecutive to count one. The court will also sentence you to 30 years in the Department of Corrections on count three. Counts 2 and 3 are to run concurrent with each other, but consecutive to count one.
Very predictable stuff for Donna Adelson, who is likely to spend the rest of her life in prison.
It is the defense counselor's duty to protect the rights of the individual, as it is the prosecution's duty to uphold and defend the laws of the state. Justice for all. Only we have a problem here.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep. I love everything. Fire spreading all around my room. My world's so bright, it's hard to breathe, but that's alright.